Chapter 301. The wind blew lightly while Maisie's words lingered in the air. Rowena's expression froze. Women had a great sixth sense. She understood what Maisie meant. She was definitely not going to let go of Nolan. The woman had climbed all the way to her head and announced her authority there. "Miss Summers, you don't look well. Are you all right?" Maisie pretended to be oblivious. Rowena smiled like it was nothing. "If you appreciate your relationship with Nolan so much, I hope you cherish it. Don't worry, Miss Summers. I'm not going to let any other woman get a chance." Any other woman, including Rowena. Maisie walked past her. She felt satisfied when she saw her expression. Rowena's face turned colder and went from bad to worse. This woman had been so lucky that even a snake couldn't kill her. That was why Winona, that useless woman, had lost to her, but did she really think she could stop her from loving Nolan? Rowena took out her phone and sent a message, "Go look into the Vanderbilts. ASAP." Maisie brought her results downstairs, but bumped into Nolan and Hans at the stairs. When Hans saw Maisie, he looked guilty and made up some reason to leave. Nolan seemed to have heard something interesting and looked elated. He strode over with his straight, long legs, 1 step. 2 steps. Maisie, who was backing up, bumped against the wall behind her. The man put his arms around her and laughed aloud. "Showed Rowena who's boss, didn't you?" Maisie didn't say anything. "Said that you fell in love with me?" Maisie was still quiet. "And you're not giving any other woman any chances?" His low voice sounded so good while his male hormones surrounded her. Maisie took a breath and blurted, "I was just joking." I couldn't stand her being arrogant, so that was why Hans had disappeared. He had been reporting. Nolan raised his brows. "Did you mean what you said?" He wasn't listening to her explanation. Maisie calmed her tone. "Why are you so excited?" Just when she was trying to escape, an arm scooped her back into his arms. "Answer me." "Nolan, we're at the ground floor." "Don't." Maisie hoped no one would show up at that moment. "All right, I know you're shy. I'll stop asking." Nolan tossed her hair and sniggered. "I'm going to take what you said seriously." He was overjoyed that she would admit that she was in love and wouldn't give another woman a chance. "How do the results look?" Nolan changed the subject and looked at her results. He smiled and said, "Not bad at all. I'll give you a big reward for working so hard for me." Maisie took the document back and said in a low voice, "No one wants your reward." He helplessly smiled. "Z. You need to learn to accept what I give to you. Other than our children, I'm going to be your family one day as your lawful wedded husband." Family. Maisie almost forgot that getting married to Nolan meant that she was building a family, and the 3 children would have a complete family. She wouldn't be alone anymore. Francisco, who was unintentionally eavesdropping, hid behind the wall, looking somewhat shocked. Chapter 302. The reason that his little goddess kept pushing him away was that she was already with Mr. Goldman and already had children. He had lost because he met her too late. At the Black Market's underground freeway, a woman with red hair and fishnet stockings walked in the arms of a man out of the massage parlor. She didn't forget to kiss him when she sent him away. "Lenny, come back soon. I'm going to miss you." The red-haired woman was going back in when she saw a masked woman in unusual clothing walking over with 2 men. She looked at the woman's mask and scoffed. "I'm sorry, we don't take female customers. The 2 hunks behind you are fine. Though." The woman in the mask looked at the 2 men, and one of them pushed a thick stack of money into the red-haired woman's hand and asked, "Is there a woman named Willow here?" The red-haired woman excitedly counted the money. It was $15,000. That was what she would make in half a year. Seeing that they were there to see Willow, the red-haired woman smiled brightly. "Yes, we do. Willow has just been here for a month. I'll bring you over right away." She didn't know why they wanted to see her, But since she had taken their money, she was going to do what they asked. The money would get things done in the underground scene. Willow stood smoking at the door in revealing clothes. The thick makeup she had put on in the morning covered what she actually looked like. She had left her honor behind since she started doing this for a living. She had to live on. The only way she could escape was to survive. "Willow, you have guests." The red-haired man brought the three people over. Willow went up to greet them even though she didn't want to. When she saw the woman in the mask standing between the two men, she was surprised. The massage parlor never took female clients. Although she had met all kinds of eccentric characters there, she had never seen a woman there. The woman in the mask coolly asked, "You're Willow?" Willow put out the cigarette on the ashtray on the trash can next to her when she heard that the woman knew her. "I am," Willow answered. The masked woman said, "Let's talk inside." Willow brought the three of them into her room. The masked woman sat on the couch. And the two men stood next to her, not showing any signs of hostility toward her. "I heard that Maisie is your sister?" When Maisie was mentioned, hatred flashed across Willow's eyes. "Why? Do you know her? Did she send you?" The masked woman raised her hand. "Don't worry. Ms. Vanderbilt. I hate that woman as much as you do." Willow paused, not sure if she should trust her. "Why are you here?" The masked woman laughed. "Do you want to leave this filthy place?" Leaving this place was the only thing on Willow's mind, but she couldn't do it. This woman. On the other hand. "Can you really help me get out of here?" The woman slowly said, "If you tell me everything about Maisie, I'll help you get out." Half an hour later. The masked woman left. She removed the mask when she got in the car and coldly smiled. Huh. She didn't expect Maisie's mom to be a de Arma. She didn't have to take matters into her own hands then. She picked up the phone. "Grandpa, it's me. There's something I need to tell you." Chapter 303. Maisie packed her bags and left the training camp. Nolan was already waiting downstairs in his car. Sherry came to send her off. She said while tugging her hand, "Maisie, can I go see you when I'm off for my break?" Maisie smiled. "Of course. You're welcome anytime." When she left the camp, she looked around the huge training field and turned to get into the car. Seeing her keeping her eyes on the view outside, Nolan played with her hair. "Don't want to leave yet?" Maisie slowly turned to look at him. "Nolan. Could you help me with something?" Nolan paused. That was the first time she asked him for help. "Sure. Tell me." "Logan is an all-round talent, and she gave up on her assessment because of me. Could you see if you can? Do you want me to promote her?" Nolan squinted. Maisie always thought of others. Had she forgotten about the wound on her arm? Maisie crossed her arms and looked away. "How could I believe that you're sincere if you can't even do this?" Logan had experience and was outstanding. If Nolan could promote her, it would give her a good chance. It wasn't too difficult to put her name in with Nolan's influence. Nolan pulled her into his arms, a smile lingering. "That depends on how you bribe me." The corner of Maisie's lips twitched. She smiled after thinking about something while lying in his arms while drawing circles on his chest with her finger. "That depends on how well you get it done." Nolan's eyes darkened. He held on to her finger and lowered his voice. "Z, don't play with fire. Or I'm going to have to ask Quincy to stop the car." Nolan nibbled her ear. Z had learned to play dirty. He couldn't be sure if he could control himself even if he became a priest for a week. Maisie struggled to get out of his hug and hummed. That's double standards. Why was he allowed to take advantage of her, but she couldn't do it back? Hold on, why would she have thought that way? Nolan crossed his legs with a poker face and helplessly smiled. You can do whatever you want when we get home. Maisie didn't say anything. He was probably wishing that she would continue seducing him. Nolan took out his phone and called Hans. Put a cadet named Logan Heinrich into the name list of those to be sent to headquarters as a priority. Arrange for it to be done by this week. After he ended the call, he turned to look at Maisie, looking like he was looking for a compliment. How did I do? Maisie excitedly stuck up her thumb. Nolan was rendered speechless. At the Goldman mansion. Mommy. The three kiddos who had not seen their mother for half a month waited at the door with the butler. They rushed toward her when they saw her get out of the car. Maisie squatted down to hug all of them and looked at them. Babies, did you miss me? Colton said, of course. Waylon chimed in, yes, Mommy, you've lost weight. Daisy asked. Did you not eat there? Maisie smirked while patting their heads. She wanted to say something but noticed that Daisy's face had become rounder. She pinched her cheek. You gained weight while I wasn't around. Daisy pouted. I didn't gain weight. Waylon crossed his arms and protested. How could we not gain weight with Godfather Helios feeding us lobsters for every meal? Chapter 304. Maisie didn't say anything. Their Godfather Helios? These two rascals were really good at flattery. Nolan walked to Mr. Cheshire, who nodded and said, Mr. Goldman. Elder Master Goldman has been waiting for you for a few hours in the study. All right. Nolan nodded and said to him, bring the kids downstairs. Maisie slowly stood up and let the three go and play. Nolan held her hand and walked into the villa. When the two walked into the study, Rowena was there along with Titus. Titus sat behind the desk. Maisie's eyes turned cold without knowing why. Grandpa, Maisie has completed the assessment and passed. So about our wedding, I stand firm on my rejection of your marriage. Nolan's face was ice cold. You're backpedaling? Yes, I'm backpedaling. You cannot be with this woman. Titus' attitude toward Maisie changed drastically. He was even firmer than he was before she went to the camp. Maisie didn't know why he would reject her so strongly. She had completed her mission. Even if she didn't get the extra 10 points, she still passed. Maisie pressed her lips together and slowly said, Elder Master Goldman, I don't understand why you're taking it back. She didn't have to marry Nolan immediately, but since this was an agreement, it should have been honored. She had done her part, spent half a month in the training camp, and put herself in danger to get the results for her assessment, but the old man was backpedaling? Titus slammed the table. Because your mother is a de Arma, the daughter of Hernandez. The de Armas. Nolan's expression got even colder. How had his grandfather suddenly found out about that? Maisie was troubled. What did this have to do with her mother and the de Armas? Nolan stood in front of Maisie to protect her. Maisie's mother was a de Arma, but she's a Vanderbilt. Dad and I knew about this. Rowena's eyes changed. Nolan and his father knew? So they had been helping her hide this the entire time. Titus stood up, pointed at him, and yelled, Great, you both knew all along and tried to hide it from me. Grandpa. If you have a prejudice against the de Armas because of my great-grandfather, you should talk to Hernandez about it. Maisie has nothing to do with the de Armas. You useless boy, how dare you defy me? You knew that the de Armas and us Goldmans are enemies. Have you forgotten how your great-grandfather was almost killed because of the de Armas? Titus was stubborn. Maisie was surprised. The de Armas did that? Nolan squared his jaw and looked grave. All of that was in the past, from your generation. And has nothing to do with me. Seeing how stubborn Nolan was, Titus suddenly picked up an ashtray and threw it in his direction. Rowena covered her mouth. Null, the ashtray hit Nolan's face and broke into pieces when it hit the floor. His face turned red, and it started bruising. Nolan. Maisie's heart skipped a beat and her eyes darkened upon seeing Titus hurt Nolan. She held her fist tight. Elder Master Goldman, Knowles is right. Even if there was something between the de Armas and the Goldmans, it was from a different generation and has nothing to do with us. Chapter 305. Rowena was shocked. How dare she go against Titus? She had fully angered him. That would be the end of her. You. Titus' face looked dim. He was furious. Get out now. Nolan held Maisie's wrist, turned around, and coldly said, The only woman that I will ever want to marry is Maisie. Seeing him leave without even looking back, Titus was reminded of how his son Nicholas was as stubborn when he wanted to marry Natasha. His eyes darkened. Although his son had married Natasha, he had agreed to it even though he wasn't happy about this daughter-in-law. This was different. Even if Maisie was a Vanderbilt, she had de Alma blood flowing in her veins. That woman would be the death of him. Rowena's heart was frozen. She had been under the impression that by informing Titus about this, he would stop Nolan from being with Maisie, but Nolan was willing to disobey his grandfather instead of giving up on that woman. Grandpa, don't worry. Ms. Vanderbilt's children just tie Nolan down. He doesn't want the kids to lose their mother. Yes, if that woman didn't have his kids, she wouldn't even be in the picture. Titus looked grave. We're Goldmans. We would never need to worry about not finding a good nanny. As for Maisie, I will never let someone with de Arma blood marry into the family. After Nolan got in the car, Maisie raised her hands and cupped his face. Nolan, let me see your face. Nolan turned around and hugged her tight in his arms that made Maisie freeze. Nolan? Z. Let me hug you for a bit. He hugged her soft body and put his face on her neck. The man who was so strong in front of Titus was showing this vulnerability to her. Thinking back on what Titus had said, she frowned. Nolan. Are the de Armas really like what your grandpa pictured them? That was from my great-grandfather's generation. Nolan looked up at her, gently touching her face. My great-grandfather had been sworn enemies with the left-wing royals. And the de Armas at that time were one of the families supporting the left. My father never wanted me to be involved in what my great-grandfather was in, but since my great-grandfather influenced Grandpa, he has a prejudice against the royals. Especially the de Armas. Nolan held her hand and looked down. I'm sorry, Maisie. I hid this from you because I didn't want you to be stressed out about this. To him, what had happened to their ancestors had nothing to do with them, so no matter who Maisie was, he was sure that he wanted her. Maisie looked at him for a while, raised her hand, and lightly touched the wound on his face. Ouch. He sucked in the air and frowned. It hurts, Z. Maisie didn't say anything. Women really were helpless when men started acting soft. She pressed her lips together. Let's go back. I'll put some medication on that. Nolan held her hand tight and smiled. Where can we go back to? The old man is furious. Where can we go? Maisie paused. Then, he smiled. Didn't you say you have a reward for me? Bring me to it. Nolan drives away from the Goldman mansion. Chapter 306. Blue Bay, a villa in a silk-stocking district. Maisie looked at the row of red maples at the side of the road through the window. The red-colored leaves of the maple trees had added a touch of life to the buildings on the street. Mountains and water surrounded the wealthy district in Bassburg. It was situated near the shore and had a comfortable environment. Not only that, but it had a good public transport network, so many wealthy businessmen or celebrities chose to stay there. She asked incredulously, Nolan, what did you bring me here for? However, Nolan did not reply. He continued to drive the car until they arrived at a 3,700 square feet detached villa. The courtyard was filled with flowery plants and greenery. There was a clear pond with a soft stone path and a sheltered wooden pavilion on the bank. The two-story villa was painted in a warm yellow color. It had a simplistic design which gave off a classy and majestic vibe. Maisie came out of the car with Nolan, and she stared at him in surprise. "Don't tell me that." There was a smile tugging at the corner of Nolan's lips as he replied, "This is our newlywed house. This place has a nice environment, and it's the perfect place for us to spend our time together. Just the two of us." The corner of Maisie's lips quivered, and she asked, "Just the two of us?" Nolan wrapped his arms around her from the back, lowered his head, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "We'll get married, so we should work on our relationship first. My dad will take care of the 3 kids. He likes kids very much. So he won't do anything to them. We should focus on ourselves first." Focus on ourselves first? Maisie had no idea why, but she did not have a good feeling about this. Suddenly, Nolan scooped her up from the ground and entered the villa. The villa was equipped with a floor-to-ceiling window, offering them a panoramic view of the deep blue sea. There was a full set of furniture in the villa as well. Before Maisie could come around to her senses, Nolan put her on the couch. Just when he was about to lean toward her, Maisie pushed him away and said, You should tend to the wound on your face first." Squinting his eyes, Nolan chuckled. "Sure." Maisie did not expect that Nolan had prepared a medical kit in the villa as well. Judging from the interior of the villa, she was certain that Nolan must have bought this villa a long time ago. Maisie used a cotton swab to dab at the bruise on his cheek. The bruise was dark and purple, and she could tell how heavy Titus had hit him just now. Nolan looked down at the woman who was treating his wound right now. The sea breeze blew through the opened floor-to-ceiling window, and the white curtain danced along with the eddies of wind. The nice smell of her hair seeped into his nostril, and from his angle of sight, he could clearly see her cherry-red lips that were slightly opened. He swallowed hard twice as a hint of desire crossed his eyes. He caressed her cheek with his finger and lowered his head to plant his lips on hers before pushing her down on the couch. Nolan, you're wound. I missed you so much, Nolan said as he grabbed her hand. Maisie was so exasperated that her face turned red. God damn it. Why must he take advantage of me whenever he has the chance? No. Nolan, I need to go to work later. Maisie tried to get up, but Nolan secured her tightly in his embrace. He bit off her button, and the corners of his mouth curled up in a wicked way. You have to stay with me while I'm recovering from my injury. By the time Maisie woke up, the sky had gotten dark. If she had learned something this afternoon, that would be she should never mess with a man who had been abstaining from sex for a long time. Otherwise, she would be the one who would get the short end of the stick. Draping in the sheet, she walked up to the closet. However, when she opened the closet, it was full of men's shirts and custom-made suits. There was nothing she could wear. When the things Nolan had said in the afternoon surfaced in her mind, she gnashed her teeth and chided inwardly, that damn son of a bitch did it on purpose. Nolan was preparing dinner in the kitchen. When Maisie came downstairs in the bathroom slippers, her stomach gave in and growled when she smelled the aroma wafting out of the kitchen. Chapter 307. Nolan turned his head to look at her, and then he was dumbfounded. Maisie was wearing a white shirt that could barely cover her thighs. Her long hair cascaded down her back, and the loose sleeves completely covered her hands. She left her collar marginally opened, giving Nolan a chance to take a glimpse at the view within. He knew she was a mischievous little darling, but he did not expect the sight of her wearing a shirt would be such an intense torment to him. Is the dinner ready, Nolan? I'm hungry, Maisie said. She flung the sleeves weakly as she walked up to the table to get some water. Nolan clicked his tongue and turned the heat lower. He approached Maisie and secured her in his embrace. Lifting his brows, he asked, You're hungry again? Maisie's hand that was holding the glass trembled. It was only when her stomach growled that Nolan chuckled and tousled her hair. I'm just joking with you. The dinner is ready. Nolan brought their dinner to the table. He had prepared a soup and a plate of spaghetti for both of them. Maisie lifted her head to look at the man who sat in front of her. Even though there was a wound on his face, he still looked as handsome and regal as always. Even though he was cooking just now, the oil and the dirt seemed not to have the slightest effect on his handsomeness. Maisie was confident that he must be God's darling. That's why he made him into such a perfect being. "Nolan, you purposely didn't prepare any clothes for me, right?" she asked with a pout as she picked up the fork. The comber of Nolan's lips curled upward, and he replied, "I already told you that you're here to keep me, the patient, company. It has been half a month since I last went to the studio." "I wonder how everything is going in the studio now," Maisie said. She was worried that Uncle Kennedy couldn't cope with the work. Nolan took a bite of the spaghetti and said, "Don't worry. I've always had someone take care of Soul Jewelry Studio." Maisie's eyelashes quivered. "So you're not going back to the Goldman mansion anymore?" "I've wanted to move out for a long time," Nolan replied. A smile playing around his lips. "After all, it's not convenient for us to do something that only a couple could do when there are outsiders around." Something that only a couple could do, Maisie had no idea why, but she did not have a good feeling about it. Maisie did not know how she made it through the 3 days and 3 nights after she was forced to stay with Nolan in the villa. She did not even have the energy to get off the bed, so Nolan brought her into the bathroom in his arms to get her washed. Maisie did not care about anything anymore after both of them had seen each other's naked bodies for the past 3 days. He brought her into the bathroom naked and took her out, wrapped in a bath towel. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Nolan let her lay on his lap and used the hairdryer to dry her hair. He ran his fingers over her hair. Her hair was smooth and soft, with the fragrance of shampoo. It was obvious that she had put a lot of effort into maintaining her hair, as there were barely any split ends. Nolan lowered his head to look at Maisie, whose eyes were fighting to stay open, and slowed down his movements. She had completely let go of her past preconceptions about him and dropped her guard against him. Not only that, but she was also accustomed to being close to him. And she even started to show her feminine side in front of him. If he were given the ability to stop the time, he would stop it at that moment. Suddenly, his phone rang, and Maisie jerked up. When Nolan saw that it was his father calling, he answered the call. "Yes? Did you run away from the house with your wife?" Nolan lifted his hand to rub the center of his eyebrows and replied, "We just moved out of the mansion." Nicholas harumphed and said, "Give the phone to Z." Nolan handed the phone to Maisie, and Maisie was stunned. However, she soon came around and took over the phone. "Mr. Goldman?" "Z, I've already learned about the whole story. I hope you can forgive Nolan's grandfather. I know he's very stubborn, but I didn't expect him to have such deep-rooted prejudice toward the royals. Especially the De Arma family." Nicholas lowered his voice and continued. "Although your mother is one of the De Armas, you can't represent the De Armas. The thing that happened between the De Armas and the Goldmans is a thing of the past. Don't worry, I will always support you guys. Even if his grandfather is against you, you're the one and only daughter-in-law I approve of." Chapter 308. Since Nolan wants no one but you, I hope that no matter what happens, you will stay by his side forever. Maisie was stunned. She did not know why, but she had a feeling that Mr. Goldman Sr. was entrusting his son's future to her. She forced herself to smile and replied, "Don't worry, Mr. Goldman." She took a look at Nolan, who sat quietly and obediently beside her before continuing, "I won't leave him alone." Nolan lifted his eyebrows slightly. Considering the fact that his father was so worried about the things between him and Maisie, he figured that he should treat him better next time. Nicholas nodded in satisfaction and replied, "Good, good, good. I'll take care of his grandfather. As for you guys, just take your time and enjoy your life. I'm sure that his grandfather will accept you as well one day." After they had finished speaking, Maisie gave the phone back to Nolan. Grinning like a Cheshire cat, Nolan pulled her into his arms and said, "Did you hear that? My dad asks you to stay by my side forever." Maisie frowned and pounded his shoulder weakly with her fist. "Don't get ahead of yourself. It's true that I promised Mr. Goldman, but if you dare to do anything to hurt me, I'll take the kids and marry another guy." Marry another guy? Nolan was dumbfounded. When he came around to his senses, his heart was filled with emotion and delight. Although they hadn't engaged to each other yet, she had already accepted that she was his wife. Nolan grabbed her hand and planted a kiss on the back of her hand. Pitching his voice low, he announced, "I won't give you the chance." After Nolan had recuperated for a few days, the bruise on his cheek had receded. He carried his blazer on his arm and walked down the stairs toward the kitchen. He leaned against the wall and looked at the slender figure in the kitchen. The corner of his mouth lifted up slightly. Maisie did not notice that someone was standing behind her. After she had turned the heat lower, she bumped into a solid embrace. Before she could say anything, that person had lowered his head and kissed her. Nolan, stop it. Maisie tried to struggle for her freedom as Nolan pressed her against the wall. Slowly, ever slowly. She was gradually losing herself in the kiss. Initially, Nolan just wanted to kiss her, but as he deepened the kiss, his desire got the best of him. The doorbell rang and brought Maisie back to reality. Her face flushed, and she pushed him away. It must be the delivery guy who came to deliver the clothes. Just when she was about to answer the door, Nolan pulled her back and draped the blazer around her. "I won't allow you to answer the door dressed like this. It would be fine if it was a woman, but what if it was a man?" He was going to gouge their eyes out. It was only then Maisie realized she was wearing Nolan's shirt, but wasn't he the main culprit who caused her to have no clothes to wear? Glaring at him, she put on his jacket and walked to the door. There was a woman dressed in a uniform outside of the door. Flashing Maisie a smile, she said, "You're Mrs. Goldman, right? Mr. Goldman has ordered all the limited pieces from our store for you, and we brought them over to you today." Before Maisie could reply, Nolan walked up to her, wrapped his arm around her shoulder, and said to them flatly, "Bring them in." The female salesperson had her people bring large and small hardcover gift bags into the living room. They were placed all over the table, and there were at least a dozen sets. Looking at the logo, all of them were international luxury brands such as T&M, Armani, Tia, Estée, and so on. Oh, Maisie was stunned. She knew that Nolan was rich since he could buy a villa without batting an eye. But she didn't expect him to buy a new batch of clothes for her instead of bringing them over from the Goldman mansion. Even if she liked to spend money, she did not dare to spend it this way. Looking at her expression, Nolan walked up to her and brought her into his arms. He kissed her cheek and said, "You don't have to feel guilty. All of my money is yours. You can spend it however you want." Chapter 309. Maisie finally saw the light right now. It was no wonder that no matter how much she earned, her 3 kids still said it wasn't enough. She was truly poor in comparison to a capitalist. Suddenly, Nolan's phone rang. He pulled his phone out. And the person who called him was none other than his grandfather. He did not walk away to answer the phone. Instead, he picked up the phone in front of Maisie and said, "Yes?" Titus seemed to have said something, and his face turned grim. Nolan snorted coldly and replied, "Ha. So you're even meddling with people around me now? Where's Quincy?" Titus replied, "I've sent Quincy on a field trip." "What's the matter? Is Rowena not capable enough to fill in his place?" Nolan frowned slightly after he heard what Titus said. Titus had transferred Quincy away from him and arranged for Rowena to be his assistant. It seemed that Titus wanted to give Rowena a chance, and he did not like it at all. Black Gold Group isn't the night banquet. You don't have the right to make such an arrangement. Titus was not happy that Nolan refused to comply with his arrangement. He said, "Let me make myself clear, you brat. If you don't want me to do anything to the Vanderbilts, you'd better let Rowena stay by your side and learn from you. After that, he hung up the call. Nolan's face was turning darker and colder with each passing second. Sensing the change in his expression, Maisie walked up to him and grabbed his hand, which had turned slightly cold. Since your grandfather insists on letting Rowena be your assistant, you should just accept it. Z, he pitched his voice low and smiled helplessly. Are you not worried at all? Maisie lifted her eyebrows and replied, if you can't resist the temptation. That means I should marry another man. You want to marry another man? Nolan asked through gritted teeth. She pulled his tie, and a smile appeared on her cherry lips, making her look even more alluring. It depends on your performance. Nolan laughed. It seemed to him that she had him wrapped around her finger. What a mischievous little darling. At a coffee shop. Resting her chin on her palm, Riley bit the straw and looked at Maisie. I thought you had gone missing. So it turns out that you had entered the training camp. Maisie chuckled, but she did not say anything. She figured that she shouldn't tell everything that had happened in the training camp to Riley. After all, Riley wasn't a good secret keeper. And there was a good chance she might tell it to her 3 kids. Oh yeah, Z, Mrs. Lucas has been asking me about you lately. In any case, she's your aunt. Are you really not going to give her a chance? She asked. Maisie lowered her head and replied, well, it seems like it's time for me to meet this Mrs. Lucas. In the Lucas family's mansion. Larissa was flipping through an old photo album in the living room. She was so absorbed in it that she didn't react even though the doorbell rang. A servant went to answer the door. But she only knew Riley from the 2 girls standing in front of the door, so she asked, Miss Hill? What brought you here today? Is Mrs. Lucas home? Yes, Mrs. Lucas is at home. The servant turned sideways and made way for them. Riley walked into the living room and greeted with a smile. Mrs. Lucas. Larissa closed the photo album when she heard Riley's voice. Just when she was about to say something, she was stumped when she saw Maisie beside Riley. Mrs. Lucas, Z said she wanted to see you, so I brought her here, Riley said as she tugged at Maisie's sleeve. Maisie glanced at the photo album in Larissa's hand and asked softly, Mrs. Lucas, I'm here to ask you about something. Let's talk in the study, Larissa said as she rose to her feet. She turned to Riley and added, you stay in the living room. Just let the maid know if you need anything. Riley nodded. Maisie followed Larissa to the study. She did not know why Larissa did not allow Riley to come with them. Could it be that outsiders couldn't hear the things she wanted to ask? Chapter 310. Larissa sat on the couch. She looked at Maisie and said, have a seat. You want to ask about your mother, right? Maisie took the seat in front of Larissa after she got her permission. She indeed wanted to know more about her mother, so she nodded. Marina is my biological sister, and I have to say, you look a lot like her, Larissa said as she laughed at herself. If she had met Maisie earlier, perhaps she would not have believed Willow and even really thought Maisie was that kind of person. As if she thought of something. She asked again, did your mother tell you why she came to Zlokova? Maisie shook her head. Larissa was confused when she saw Maisie shake her head. She didn't tell me either. Honestly, had it not been for Willow's bracelet, I wouldn't have known that she had come to Zlokova. You didn't know either? Maisie was stunned. Even Larissa doesn't know why my mother came all the way to Zlokova to escape from the D'Ama family? You don't have to be so surprised. When your mother left home that year, I always thought she was going to Morwich. Morwich? Maisie was stunned again. My mom went to Morwich before. Talking about Morwich, doesn't Mr. Lincoln came from Morwich? Lowering her head, Larissa continued. Before I tell you about your mother, can you answer one question of mine first? What is it? She said. What's going on between you and Mr. Goldman from the Goldmans? Larissa pressed on. Maisie met her eyes, and she could vaguely guess why Larissa was asking this question. She parted her lips and answered. I'm sure you already know the answer, right? After all, she already had kids with Nolan, and the only thing missing right now was a marriage ceremony. Marriage ceremony. Honestly, she didn't think she would have the idea of marrying him. Larissa's face became stern upon noticing the blush on Maisie's cheek. It seemed to her that Maisie had obviously fallen for Nolan. After Maisie snapped herself back to reality, she said, I've already answered your question, Mrs. Lucas. Can you tell me about my mother now? Why would she leave the De Arma family? Not only that, but she had even gone as far as discarding her identity as a royal in Staslo, changing her name, and living in seclusion in Zlokova. Larissa lowered her head. There was a sad expression on her face. And it took her quite a while before she started speaking again. She was sick, she said slowly. Was it cancer? Maisie asked. Larissa was stunned, and then she shook her head. Your mother's illness was strange. She was perfectly fine before leaving the De Arma family. She told her that her mother had been as fit as a fiddle before leaving the De Arma family. Then, one day, she noticed that her sister was coughing blood. She had wanted to tell their father about it, but her sister asked her not to. Marina had told her that she did not want to get their father worried. Larissa smiled bitterly and continued. She never told me what was wrong with her until she left a letter and chose to go to Morwich with Strix. Strix? Maisie asked, dumbfounded. Who is Strix? Larissa smiled slightly and replied, he was your mother's boyfriend. Maisie's eyelashes trembled slightly. Her father had said that her mother always had someone in her heart, and that person was not him, but this Strix that Larissa mentioned. However, her father had told her that her mother had died from cancer. Could it be that her father didn't know what her mother was really suffering from? By the way, Mrs. Lucas, do you know about the feud between the Goldmans and the De Arma family? Why would Nolan's grandfather say that someone from the De Arma family nearly killed Nolan's great-grandfather? Did the De Arma family really do such a thing before? Larissa's face sank. She paused for a moment before answering, you should ask your grandfather about this. Your grandfather doesn't allow me to meddle with the affairs of the De Arma family. So if you want to know more about the feud between the Goldmans and the De Armas, you should go to him.